a quiet archive record. Tonight, we're stepping into a slow unfolding. Settle in and gently descend into tonight's world. This story is a quiet, long-form interview with God, unfolding in a timeless, minimal space. Through a series of gentle, reflective conversations, the interviewer asks the questions many people carry but rarely say out loud, about suffering, doubt, love, fear, becoming, and how to live well in an uncertain world. God responds not with commands or dogma, but with patient, expansive reflections that reframe belief as attention, faith as relationship, and meaning as something practiced rather than possessed. The dialogue moves from curiosity to depth, from confusion to orientation, ending with grounded guidance meant not to control, but to accompany the listener back into their own life. This is an interview with God. Chapter 1. The room that was already listening. The room did not announce itself. There were no doors, no edges I could point to and say this is where it begins. It felt instead like noticing a thought I'd been avoiding for a long time. A long table waited in the center of the space, pale and circular, its surface unmarked. 2 chairs faced one another across it, simple, square, grey. Neither felt symbolic. They felt practical, as if they were meant to be used, not admired. I took my seat. I rested my hands on the table, surprised by how solid it felt. I took a breath. "I wasn't sure if you'd come," I said quietly. Across from me, something shifted. Not movement, exactly, but attention turning. A presence clarified, the way a thought does when you finally stop interrupting it. "You're already speaking," a voice said, "so I'm already here." I nodded, more to myself than to the space between us. "I don't know how to do this," I said. "I don't know what the rules are." "There are no rules," the voice replied. "Only habits, and habits can be set down." That eased something in me. "Then I'll start simple," I said. "Are you God?" The pause that followed was not dramatic. It was patient. "I am what answers," God said, "but not always in the way the question expects. Most people ask that question hoping for certainty. Fewer ask it hoping for honesty." "That's not exactly a yes," I said. "No," God said, "but it's closer to truth than the word yes would be." I exhaled slowly. "People argue over you," I said. "They build entire lives around what they think you want. Some believe you're watching every step they take. Others believe you're nowhere at all." I looked across the table. "So, I guess my real question is this," I said. "How do you see the landscape of our belief? And does believing in you even matter? What happens to those who don't believe you exist at all?" God did not answer immediately. The pause felt deliberate, as if the question required careful placement rather than speed. "I do not assess belief the way you do," God said. "You treat belief as allegiance, as a line dividing those who are right from those who are wrong. I experience it as orientation." "Orientation toward what?" I asked. "Toward honesty," God said. "Toward responsibility. Toward one another. Belief matters only insofar as it shapes how you live." "So, belief in you isn't the point," I said. "Not by itself," God said. "Belief that does not expand compassion, curiosity, or care is belief that has mistaken certainty for faith." I leaned forward slightly. So, what about the people who don't believe in you at all? I asked. The ones who reject the idea entirely. They are not lost to me, God said. Existence is not a membership system. You do not fall outside of reality by misnaming it. That surprised me. So, disbelief isn't punished, I said. No, God said. What shapes your experience is not whether you acknowledge me, but whether you remain open to truth, repair, and responsibility. Many who do not believe in me live closer to what I value than those who claim my name loudly. That will upset people, I said. Then what about free will? I asked. Do we actually have it, or does it just feel like we do? You have constrained freedom, God said. You choose within conditions you did not design. Freedom is not absolute, but it is real. The illusion is thinking freedom means absence of consequence. So we're not puppets, I said. No, God said. But you are not authors of the entire script either. You improvise within a scene already in progress. I leaned forward. If you already know what we're going to do, I asked, is it really a choice? Knowing an outcome does not cause it, God said. You confuse foreknowledge with coercion. A meteorologist can know it will rain without forcing the storm. Awareness does not negate agency. Do you ever change your mind? I asked. Because if you don't, that sounds rigid. But if you do, how can you be all-knowing? God's answer came slowly, layered. I do not change in essence, God said, but I respond. Relationship without responsiveness is control. What you experience as me changing my mind is often your position changing within the relationship. So you adapt to us? I asked. I remain coherent, God said, but interaction alters expression. This is not contradiction, it is intimacy. I let that sit. Then, without planning to, I asked, what is 345,678 multiplied by 23,490,592? The question hung there, absurd and sudden. God did not react the way I expected. It is a very large number, God said calmly, and completely irrelevant to why you asked it. I blinked. I was just curious if you knew, I said. I do, God said, but you did not ask because you wanted the answer. You asked because you wanted to see whether I would perform. I felt caught. So, why didn't you? Because certainty does not nourish you the way meaning does, God said. And because if I answered every question as a display of capacity, you would stop asking the ones that matter. That's frustrating, I said. Yes, God said. Growth often is. I leaned back, smiling despite myself. All right, I said. Then let's try this one. What's the meaning of life? God did not rush. The meaning of life, God said, is not a sentence you can memorize. It is a posture you practice. Life means what you repeatedly orient yourself toward. That sounds vague, I said. It is broad, God said, because meaning must survive changing circumstances. Fixed meanings collapse under pressure. Lived meanings adapt. I was quiet for a moment. Do you experience emotion? I asked. Like, do you feel things? Yes, God said, but not chemically and not reactively. My emotions are relational states. I experience joy when connection expands, grief when possibility contracts, Satisfaction when repair occurs. Do you laugh? I asked. Yes, God said. Often. At what? I asked. At irony, God said. At tenderness that survives cynicism. At humans who insist they are insignificant while altering the lives of others without realizing it. That image stayed with me. What about déjà vu? I asked. Those moments where it feels like something already happened. Déjà vu, God said, is often your pattern recognition misfiring, but occasionally it is awareness brushing against probability. You glimpse how many paths nearly overlapped. So, coincidences aren't planned? I asked. Some are emergent, God said. Some are invitations you notice only because you were ready. Meaning is not always assigned beforehand. Sometimes it arises at the moment of recognition. I nodded slowly. All right then. Do you know what question I'm about to ask next? I said. And if you do, what is the question? And what is the answer? God did not smile. There was no sense of performance in the pause that followed. Yes, God said. I know. I waited. The question you're about to ask, God continued, is whether knowing removes the need for asking, whether foreknowledge empties choice of meaning. I felt that land. And the answer? I asked. The answer is that knowing does not replace participation, God said. Awareness does not cancel curiosity. Even when a question is known, it must still be asked to be lived. So my asking still matters, I said. Yes, God said, because meaning does not arise from answers alone. It arises from the act of turning toward them. I sat quietly with that. So even if you already know, I said, the question isn't wasted. No, God said, it is fulfilled. That made complete sense, I thought. Chapter 2. The questions we avoid asking. The quiet after that last realization did not settle. It shifted. The room felt the same, unchanged in shape or color, but my posture had altered without my noticing. I was leaning forward now, elbows closer to the table, as if curiosity had become physical. Across from me, God remained steady, not leaning in or away, simply present in a way that did not compete with my attention. I spoke before the stillness could fully arrange itself. There's something I want to ask, I said, but it feels childish. God did not interrupt. A lot of what we talk about, I continued, stays very human. Our fears, our relationships, our meaning. But sometimes I wonder if that's because we're afraid of how small we are. The attention across the table sharpened slightly. You are not afraid of smallness, God said. You are afraid of insignificance. I nodded. Are we alone? I asked. In the universe, I mean. The question felt larger than the room. No, God said. You are not alone. The simplicity of the answer startled me, more than if it had been complicated. So, aliens exist, I said. Yes, God said without hesitation. Life is not a singular experiment. Consciousness is not a one-time event. I sat back, processing that. Why doesn't that change everything? I asked. Why hasn't that knowledge shattered religion, philosophy, history? Because knowledge does not transform on its own, God said. Integration takes time. You have known for decades that your planet is fragile. That knowledge alone has not changed behavior either. Do they know about us? I asked. Yes, God said, in the way neighbors know of one another long before they speak. Do they watch us? I asked. Observation is a spectrum, God said. Some observe with curiosity, some with restraint, some not at all. Attention is not uniform across the universe. I hesitated, then asked, what do they call you? God's response came with something like, those that do refer to me less as an identity and more as a principle, something closer to source, field, or continuum. So God is a human thing, I said. It is a relational thing, God said. Names arise when intimacy seeks language. I let that sit. Do you rule all of this? I asked. The universe, I mean, everything. I am not a ruler, God said. Rulership implies hierarchy enforced through control. I am coherence. I am the condition that allows laws to exist without issuing them moment by moment. So you don't micromanage galaxies, I said. No, God said. And neither do you micromanage your cells. That analogy landed immediately. Are there things happening out there you don't know? I asked. No, God said. But knowledge is not surveillance. Awareness does not flatten mystery. I frowned slightly. That's hard to imagine. Yes, God said. Your metaphors strain here. I smiled faintly. What happens when we die? I asked. Do we see the people we loved? God did not rush this answer. Yes, God said, but not in the way you expect. How so? I asked. You are reunited through recognition, not arrangement, God said. You do not gather as you did in bodies. You encounter one another as patterns of meaning, memory, and shared becoming. Love is not erased by death. It is clarified. So it's not just nothing, I said. No, God said. Nothingness is a fear born of interruption. Consciousness does not end. It changes orientation. Is reincarnation real? I asked. Yes, God said, but not always individual and not always immediate. Consciousness recirculates. Identity loosens. What returns is not always the self you remember, but the learning you carried. So we don't always come back as ourselves, I said. No, God said. You are not meant to repeat endlessly. You are meant to contribute. That felt important. Is there, I said slowly, anything humans are better at than you? The question felt exposed the moment it left me, as if I had crossed a line I hadn't realized was there. God did not answer right away. When the response came, it was calm, unguarded. Yes, God said. That single word surprised me more than any denial would have. At what? I asked. Living inside limitation, God said. I do not experience constraint the way you do. I do not feel time pressing against a single body. I do not have to choose one path at the expense of all others in the same way. So we're not inferior, I said. No, God said. You are specialized. That word lingered. Do you ever get tired of us? I asked. No, God said. But I do observe cycles. Like what? I asked. You oscillate between certainty and doubt, God said. Between connection and withdrawal. Between curiosity and control. These cycles are not failures. They are rhythms. That's comforting, I said. It is descriptive, God said. I leaned forward again. There's something else, I said. People worry they're broken. Yes, God said. They ask whether something is fundamentally wrong with them, I continued. Whether they missed something everyone else figured out. You are not broken, God said. You are shaped by experiences that exceeded your capacity at the time. That shaping feels like damage, only because you have not yet learned how to carry it without hiding. That doesn't mean the pain wasn't real, I said. No, God said. It means the pain is not the end of the story. I swallowed. When you look at humanity, I asked, what do you actually see first? God answered without hesitation. Effort, God said. Not success. Not failure. Effort. Uneven, imperfect, persistent. Not sin, I asked. No, God said. Sin is a language you develop to describe misalignment. Effort is the condition beneath it. That reframed something quietly. Do you forgive us? I asked. I do not withdraw from you, God said. Forgiveness is not a transaction. It is a posture of remaining. People feel far from you, I said. Yes, God said. But distance is not mutual. Feelings narrate experience beautifully, but they are unreliable historians. So what's actually true? I asked. That you are held even when you feel dropped, God said. That absence is often interpreted, not enacted. The words stayed with me. I sat back, letting the room breathe again. And this, I said finally, this isn't just curiosity, is it? No, God said. This is orientation. You are not collecting answers. You are learning how to ask without fleeing the silence afterward. Chapter 3. The questions beneath the questions. Across the table, God remained, not waiting, not withdrawing, simply present in a way that did not rush me toward the next thought. I exhaled slowly. There's something bothering me, I said, about all of this. We keep circling meaning, I continued. Purpose, becoming, consciousness. But I can't shake the feeling that we keep missing something simpler, or maybe something deeper. The attention across from me sharpened, not intensely, but precisely. Say it, God said. I hesitated, then asked, what if life doesn't actually have meaning? What if that's something humans invented because we're uncomfortable with randomness? God did not answer immediately. Meaning, God said, is not an object waiting to be discovered like a fossil. It is a pattern that emerges when awareness interacts with limitation. You ask whether meaning is real because you expect it to exist independently of you. It does not. So it is invented, I said. No, God said. It is generated. There is a difference. Invention implies falseness. Generation implies emergence. Fire is not invented by wood, but it does not exist without it either. I let that image settle. So the meaning of life isn't a sentence, I said. No, God said. It is a practice. Life means what you consistently orient yourself toward, while knowing you will not have enough time to do everything. That landed heavier than I expected. I shifted in my seat. Some scientists talk about a theory of everything, I said. A single framework that explains all forces, all particles, all reality. Does something like that actually exist? Yes, God said. I blinked. It does? Yes, God said. But it is not mathematical alone. So physics can't finish it, I said. No, God said. Mathematics can describe relationships with extraordinary precision, but it cannot tell you why awareness experiences itself as separate. A true theory of everything must account not only for matter and energy, but for perception, choice, and meaning. So consciousness breaks the equation, I said. It completes it, God said. But humans keep trying to solve reality while excluding the solver. That felt uncomfortably accurate. Is the universe infinite? I asked. God's answer came carefully. Infinity is a word you use for something that exceeds your capacity to contain it conceptually, God said. The universe is finite in structure, infinite in extension of meaning. Whether that satisfies you depends on what you are actually asking. What am I asking? I said. You are asking whether there is an edge, God said. Not spatially, but existentially. You want to know whether reality runs out of room for significance. And does it? I asked. No, God said. But it does run out of time. That is why meaning matters. I nodded slowly. What's at the center of a black hole? I asked. Really? God did not rush. Not destruction, God said. Not chaos. A black hole is not a hole at all. It is a region where your current models of space and time collapse. What exists there is not absence, but compression, information folded beyond your present ability to retrieve it. So it's not nothing, I said. No, God said. Nothingness is far rarer than you imagine. That sentence stayed with me. Is talent real? I asked. Or is it just a story we tell ourselves? Talent is real, God said, but it is incomplete on its own. You mistake early aptitude for destiny. Talent is potential shaped by attention, opportunity, and persistence. Without cultivation, it fades. Without humility, it hardens. So some people really are born with more, I said. Yes, God said, but that does not determine who they become. Potential is unevenly distributed. Meaning is not. I leaned back. So if some are born with more than others, I said, more safety, more talent, more opportunity, are humans actually equal? Or do some lives hold more value than others? The question lingered longer than I expected. When the response came, it was measured. You confuse equality with sameness, God said, and value with advantage. They are not the same. I listened. No human life contains more worth than another, God continued. Worth is not distributed unevenly. It is inherent. What is distributed unevenly are circumstances, which don't feel incidental, I said. They shape everything. Yes, God said. Circumstances shape experience. They do not determine value. I leaned forward slightly. So someone born into suffering, I said, is not less? No, God said, they are not less. And someone born into abundance is not more. Advantage amplifies influence, not worth. That distinction settled slowly. Then why allow such imbalance? I asked. Why not make it equal? Because equality of condition would erase responsibility, God said. Difference reveals how you treat one another. Inequality is not endorsement. It is exposure. Exposure of what? I asked. Of conscience, God said. Those with more are revealed by what they do with it. Those with less are revealed by what they endure, but never diminished by it. I sat quietly. So value isn't measured by contribution, I said, or success. No, God said. A child who does nothing but exist is already complete in worth. Productivity is not the currency of being. That landed heavily. There's a darker question I've been avoiding, I said. God remained still. Is there such a thing as pure evil? I asked. Someone like Hitler. How do you see him? Do you forgive him? The room did not tense. The question did not shock. Evil, God said, is not a substance. It is a collapse of empathy combined with certainty. Hitler was not born evil. He became dangerously coherent around a false narrative that dehumanized others while justifying itself. Do you forgive him? I asked. I do not operate forgiveness as endorsement or erasure, God said. I see clearly what he became and the harm he caused. Accountability is not optional. Forgiveness, in my sense, means refusing to allow even the worst actions to define the limits of transformation. That does not undo consequences. So he isn't excused, I said. No, God said. But neither is he reduced to a symbol that prevents understanding. When you turn people into monsters, you stop learning how monsters are made. That chilled me more than condemnation would have. Do you intervene in wars? I asked. I intervene through conscience, God said. Through resistance, dissent, and restraint. I do not override collective will without unraveling agency itself. Wars are not caused by my absence. They are sustained by human certainty. That feels unsatisfying, I said. Yes, God said. Reality often is. I was quiet for a moment, then asked, what questions am I not asking that I should be? God's response came slowly, deliberately. You are not asking what you are willing to change once you leave this room, God said. You are asking questions that expand your understanding, but avoiding the one that would alter your habits. And the answer, I asked, the answer, God said, is that listening without adjustment becomes entertainment. Wisdom begins when curiosity costs you something. I swallowed. Does free will actually exist? I asked. Or are we just following patterns we don't see? You have constrained freedom, God said. You cannot choose your starting conditions, but you can choose how you relate to them. Determinism describes influence, not inevitability. So, I'm not trapped, I said. No, God said. But you are responsible. I leaned forward again. Do you ever feel misunderstood? I asked. Yes, God said. Frequently. By the people closest to you? I asked. Especially by them, God said. Familiarity often breeds assumption. Many speak confidently on my behalf while listening very little. That sounds lonely, I said. It is quiet, God said. But quiet is not absence. It is space awaiting attention. I sat with that. Chapter 4. The questions that refuse to stay quiet. The room did not grow quieter. If anything, it felt more alert, as though the conversation itself had leaned forward. I noticed my body before I noticed my thoughts. how my shoulders were no longer braced, how my breathing had slowed without effort. Something about asking larger questions had made the smaller anxieties loosen their grip. I ran my fingers once along the edge of the table, then stopped. There are questions people ask when they're alone, I said. Not philosophical ones, not the kind you debate. God did not interrupt. They're the questions that come after something breaks, I continued. After loss, after fear, after watching something terrible happen and realizing there was nothing you could do. The presence across from me felt steady, attentive. Those questions, God said, are often closer to truth than the ones you rehearse. I nodded. Why do some people die young? I asked. Children, teenagers, people who barely had time to begin, while others live long lives, sometimes doing terrible things. That feels unfair. God did not soften the answer. Because time is not distributed according to virtue, God said. You want lifespan to function as reward or punishment, but life is not a courtroom. It is a condition. That's hard to accept, I said. Yes, God said, because acceptance would require releasing the belief that the universe owes you symmetry. It does not. It offers meaning, not balance. So there's no reason, I asked. There are causes, God said. Biological, environmental, historical. But reasons imply intention aimed at explanation. Most loss is not designed to teach. It simply happens within a world that moves. Then what do you say to the people left behind? I asked. I remain, God said. Not to justify what happened, but to accompany what remains. Meaning is not hidden in the length of a life. It is revealed in the depth of connection it touched. I sat quietly with that. People keep seeing strange things in the sky, I said. UAPs, objects that don't behave like anything we know. Are they aliens? Yes, God said. I almost laughed. You say that so casually. Because it is not new, God said. Your awareness is what is new. Are they visiting? I asked. Some observe, God said. Some pass through. Some remain indifferent. You are not the center of cosmic attention, but neither are you insignificant. Are they a threat? I asked. No, God said. Not in the way you imagine. Fear arises when uncertainty meets imagination without humility. I leaned back. What about the Bermuda Triangle? I asked. Planes, ships, disappearances. Is that something? Yes, God said. It is a convergence of natural phenomena, magnetic variation, weather patterns, human error, combined with narrative hunger. Mystery attracts meaning-seeking. Not all mystery is intentional. So not everything strange is a message, I said. No, God said. Sometimes it is simply complexity resisting simplification. What about Atlantis? I asked. Did it exist? Yes, God said, but not as a single advanced civilization lost in a day. It refers to multiple coastal cultures erased by geological change and preserved in myth. You remember catastrophes symbolically when history cannot hold it. And the pyramids, I asked, how were they built and why? God's response lengthened. They were built through human ingenuity, coordination, and persistence, God said. Not magic, not intervention. They represent something you underestimate, what humans can accomplish when belief, labor, and meaning align. And why build them? I asked. To orient themselves within time, God said. To assert continuity in the face of mortality. To say, we were here and we mattered. That felt familiar. So much of this, I said, comes back to fear. Fear of not mattering. Fear of disappearing. Yes, God said. Fear is the gravitational force of the human psyche. It pulls thoughts inward unless countered by trust. What about guilt? I asked. People carry so much of it. Because guilt is often taught as identity rather than signal, God said. Guilt can guide repair, but when it becomes who you are, it immobilizes you. So you don't want us drowning in it, I said. No, God said. I want you responsive, not paralyzed. Responsibility assumes change is still possible. That's not how guilt is usually taught, I said. No, God said. Because guilt is easier to control than hope. I nodded slowly. What do you do when people hurt each other in your name? I asked. I grieve, God said. Not because my identity is damaged, but because certainty used as justification is among the deepest wounds you inflict. When my name closes compassion, it has been misunderstood. Do you stop it? I asked. I resist it, God said, through those who refuse to trade humanity for belonging, through conscience that remains inconvenient. That's subtle, I said. Most meaningful resistance is, God said. Spectacle fades. Integrity endures. I was quiet for a while after that. What about prayers that aren't addressed to you? I asked. Thoughts, wishes, longings. I hear orientation, God said, not language. Longing has many dialects. And anger, I asked. When someone screams into the dark and says they hate you. Anger spoken outward still assumes presence, God said. Rage is often grief that has not yet learned how to speak. And silence, I asked. Silence can be rest, God said. Or exhaustion. I attend to the difference. I look down at the table. People are afraid something is wrong with them, I said. That they're broken. You are not broken, God said. You are shaped by experiences that exceeded your capacity at the time. That shaping feels like damage only because you have not learned how to carry it openly. Some wounds don't heal, I said. Some wounds integrate. God said, healing is not always removal. Sometimes it is learning how to live without hiding. I swallowed. So you don't expect us to be whole before coming to you, I said. No, God said. I am not a reward for completion. I am present in process. I sat quietly. What do you say to people who feel abandoned by you? I asked. I do not argue with their experience, God said. Feeling abandoned is real, even when abandonment has not occurred. My response is consistency, not correction. Consistency can be hard to trust, I said. Yes, God said, especially if your history taught you that care is conditional. The room felt steady, grounded, and I understood then that this chapter had not been about darkness. It had been about refusing to look away from it, not to explain it, not to justify it, but to remain present inside it. And that somehow felt like enough to keep going. Chapter 5. The question behind the altar. There's a question people argue about more than almost anything else, I said. It's caused wars, divisions, families breaking apart. God did not interrupt. And the strange thing, I continued, is that everyone asking it is convinced they're being faithful by asking it. The attention across from me sharpened, not defensively, but alert. Which religion is right? I asked. The silence that followed was longer than most, not heavy, careful. None of them, God said, and all of them. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. That sounds like a dodge, I said. It would be, God said, if religions were meant to be answers. They are not. They are lenses. Lenses for what? I asked. For approaching the ineffable without being paralyzed by it, God said. Each religion arises from a particular culture, geography, fear, hope, and historical moment. They translate what cannot be held directly into symbols the human nervous system can tolerate. So they're all partial, I said. Yes, God said. And the moment a partial truth declares itself total, it becomes dangerous. I leaned back slightly. People don't like hearing that, I said. No, God said, because certainty feels safer than humility. But certainty closes the very thing religion was meant to open. So none of them are fully right, I said. They are right where they produce compassion, humility, restraint, and care, God said. They are wrong where they produce fear, superiority, or violence. That sounds subjective, I said. It is relational, God said. Truth that cannot survive relationship is not truth. It is ideology. I frowned slightly. So belief isn't what matters most, I said. No, God said. Orientation matters. What you do with belief matters. Two people can hold the same doctrine and live in entirely different moral universes. That explains a lot, I said quietly. Religion, God said, is a finger pointing towards something. You argue endlessly about the finger while ignoring what it points to. I sat with that image. So why allow so many religions at all? I asked. Why not just one? Because humanity is not one story, God said. It is many overlapping ones. A single language cannot carry what you are trying to express. Diversity of form is not confusion, it is adaptation. Then why do people kill each other over it? I asked. Because identity fused with certainty seeks enemies, God said. When belief becomes the self, disagreement feels like annihilation. I nodded slowly. There's another question that feels even more dangerous, I said. Maybe because it threatens the foundation of everything. God remains still. Have you always existed? I asked. Or did you have a beginning? The room felt suddenly very quiet, not empty, but attentive in a deeper way. I have always existed, God said. And I have a beginning. I blinked. That's contradictory. It appears so from within time, God said. but time is not the frame in which I originate. Then explain it, I said, as best you can. God's answer unfolded slowly. I do not emerge from time, God said. Time emerges from me. Within your experience, everything must have a cause, a before, a sequence. But causality itself is a property of the universe, not of what gives rise to it. So you didn't begin, I said. I did not begin within time, God said. But there is a sense in which awareness differentiates itself. Expression unfolds. Relationship becomes possible. I leaned forward. Did something create you? I asked. No, God said. But I am not alone in the way you imagine. Consciousness is not solitary. It is relational at its root. That sounds like you're avoiding the question, I said. No, God said. I am refusing to collapse it into a human metaphor. Creation is not a ladder with a first rung. It is an emergence. So no higher God above you, I said. Hierarchy is your projection, God said. I am not the top of a chain. I am the field in which chains appear. That sentence sat heavily in the room. Then why do people imagine you as a ruler? I asked. Because power is easier to imagine than coherence, God said. Rulers command, fields invite. One requires obedience, the other requires participation. I exhaled slowly. There's something unsettling about that, I said. Yes, God said, because it removes the comfort of blame. I was quiet for a moment. If you didn't start as a being, I said, how do you experience yourself now? As awareness in relationship, God said. As presence responding to presence. I am not static, but I am not unstable. So you don't change, I said. I do not change in essence, God said. But expression evolves. Relationship always alters expression. I nodded. This chapter feels different, I said, less comforting. Yes, God said. Comfort is not always the goal. Orientation is. I sat there longer, not reaching for another question, because for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. And that, I sensed, meant the conversation was working. Chapter 6. What you do with this. The room felt unchanged. The same table rested between us, pale and unmarked. The same two chairs faced one another, square and still. The same quiet neutrality filled the space, neither warm nor cold, neither sacred nor ordinary. It did not insist on reverence. It did not reward performance. It simply remained. And yet, something in me recognized that this moment was different, not because the conversation had run out of questions, but because it had reached a point where asking more without changing anything would begin to feel like avoidance, like circling truth instead of stepping toward it. I rested my hands on the table, palms down, grounding myself in the simple fact of being there. We've talked about a lot, I said. Religion, meaning, fear, death, the universe, consciousness, things people argue about endlessly. God remained attentive, not leaning in, not withdrawing, simply present. But I don't think that's what most people really want, I continued. Not in the end. What do they want? God said. They want to know what to do, I said. how to live, how to move through the world without becoming numb, cruel, or overwhelmed. What to carry with them when this conversation ends and the noise comes back. The silence that followed was deliberate, not heavy, expectant, like a pause taken not to delay, but to gather weight. "Then let us speak plainly," God said. I straightened slightly, feeling the shift in tone. Not harsher, but clearer, less exploratory, more grounded. "I will not give you rules meant to replace your judgment," God said, "nor commandments designed to control behavior through fear. Those have been offered before, and you know how easily they are weaponized. They become tools of dominance rather than guidance." I nodded. That history was impossible to deny. "What I will offer," God continued, "is orientation. Ways of moving through the world that remain useful when certainty collapses, when belief systems fracture, when explanations fail. Orientation endures where answers do not." The room felt focused now, as if it were listening with me. "First," God said, "practice attention before reaction." The words landed simply, without ornament. "Most harm is not born of cruelty," God continued, "but of speed. You respond before you understand. You defend before you listen. You conclude before you inquire. In that haste, fear masquerades as clarity." I thought of arguments escalated too quickly, of words said before understanding arrived. "Slow your responses," God said, "not to appear wise, but to become accurate. Clarity follows attention, not urgency. A paused reaction is often the first act of responsibility." I breathed out slowly. "Second," God said, "tell the truth as carefully as you can afford to." I waited. "Not the truth that humiliates," God continued. "Not the truth used to dominate, expose, or punish, but the truth that invites repair. Silence born of fear corrodes slowly, invisibly. It turns connection brittle." "That's difficult," I said. "Yes," God said. "Difficulty is not a sign of error. It is often the price of integrity." "Third," God said, "resist the addiction to certainty." The word addiction caught my attention. "Certainty feels like safety," God continued. "It offers the illusion of control, but certainty that cannot be questioned becomes brittle. It fractures under pressure and turns violent when threatened." I nodded slowly. "Leave room for revision," God said. "If your beliefs cannot be examined, they will eventually collapse or harden into something that harms you and others." "Fourth," God said, "measure your life not by what you accumulate, but by what becomes possible around you." I leaned forward slightly. "Notice who feels safer in your presence," God said. "Who feels freer to speak, to question, to exist without performance. Notice who becomes more themselves around you, not less. These are more reliable indicators of alignment than success, recognition, or moral signaling." That one landed quietly, deeply. "Fifth," God continued, "learn the difference between guilt and responsibility." I waited, sensing there was more. "Guilt immobilizes," God said. "It collapses inward and becomes identity. Responsibility assumes that change is still possible. When you cause harm, do not disappear into shame. Repair what you can, learn what you must, continue forward." I exhaled slowly, feeling how much weight people carried unnecessarily. Sixth, God said, protect your capacity for rest. I almost laughed softly. Exhaustion distorts perception, God continued. A tired mind mistakes threat for truth and urgency for importance. Many of your worst decisions are not moral failures, they are fatigue failures. That felt uncomfortably accurate. Rest is not laziness, God said. It is maintenance of discernment. Without it, even wisdom curdles. Seventh, God said, stay curious about those you are tempted to dismiss. I leaned forward. Dehumanization rarely announces itself, God said. It arrives quietly, disguised as certainty, humor, righteousness, or efficiency. Curiosity interrupts it. When you ask instead of assume, you interrupt the machinery of harm. Eighth, God said, do not confuse belonging with agreement. I felt the relevance of that immediately. You can remain in relationship without sameness, God continued. Difference does not require dominance. Learn how to stay present without winning. Learn how to disagree without erasing. That one alone could change a lot, I said. Yes, God said, which is why it is resisted. I sat back, letting the list settle, not as commands, but as orientation points. Now, God said, something you have not yet asked directly. I looked up. You wonder what this interview is for, God said. What you are meant to take away. What, if anything, should change? Yes, I said. I do. This conversation, God said, is not meant to make you certain. It is meant to make you available. Available to what? I asked. Available to listening, God said. Available to revision. Available to one another. Certainty closes doors. Availability opens them. So no final answers, I said. No, God said. Final answers end conversations. What you need are better questions, asked with patience and lived with humility. I sat quietly for a moment. What about all the big mysteries we talked about? I asked. Aliens, death, religion, the universe. People are fascinated by those. Yes, God said, because they remind you that you are not the center of reality, that humility is healthy, awe is corrective, but fascination without integration becomes distraction. So the point wasn't to solve them, I said. No, God said. The point was to remind you that not knowing is not a failure state. It is a starting position. I nodded slowly. If someone listened to this entire conversation, I said, what would you want them to remember most? God did not answer immediately. The pause felt intentional, weighted, that you are not alone in the work of being human, God said. That confusion does not disqualify you from meaning, that doubt is not betrayal, and that presence matters more than performance. I felt my throat tighten slightly. And what would you want them to stop doing? I asked. Stop outsourcing your conscience, God said, to institutions, to leaders, to ideologies. Use them as tools, not replacements. Responsibility cannot be delegated without cost. That's dangerous advice, I said quietly. Yes, God said, because it returns power to the individual, and power always carries risk. I sat with that for a long moment. What about prayer? I asked. After this, how should people talk to you? Speak honestly, God said, not reverently, not politely. Honesty sustains relationship, performance erodes it. And if someone doesn't believe in you, I asked, then let them speak to what they trust instead, God said. Orientation matters more than vocabulary. Integrity matters more than language. I smiled faintly. What about fear? I asked. It comes back so easily. Yes, God said. Fear will not disappear, but you can learn not to obey it automatically. Fear is information, not instruction. And love? I asked. Love is risk, God said. There is no version of love that does not expose you to loss. But the absence of love does not protect you. It only limits you. I leaned back. Do you expect us to get this right? I asked. No, God said. I expect you to keep adjusting. That's it? I said. Yes, God said. Growth is iterative. Perfection is irrelevant. I sat quietly, letting the weight of the conversation gather. One last thing, I said. If you had to give something like commandments, but not the old kind. God's presence felt steady, almost solemn. Then hear them as reminders, God said. Not laws. I listened. Pay attention longer than is comfortable. Repair more than you defend. Stay curious when certainty tempts you. Rest before you decide. Humanize before you categorize. Return when you forget. The words hung in the room, not carved into stone, not demanded, simply offered. That's quieter than I expected, I said. Yes, God said. Quiet endures. I was silent for a long time after that. So this is the end, I said finally. This form of the conversation, God said. Yes. I nodded. What happens now? I asked. You return, God said, not as someone who knows more, but as someone who listens differently. And you? I asked. I remain, God said, as I always have. I stood slowly. The room did not disappear. Nothing dramatic occurred. No light flared. No voice echoed. Just a steady sense of something complete without being closed. As I stepped away from the table, I understood something clearly for the first time. This interview had never been about answers. It had been about posture, about how to stand inside uncertainty without hardening, how to live without needing to finish the story, how to remain human without outsourcing responsibility. And as the room loosened its hold, not vanishing, but receding into availability, I carried with me not certainty, but orientation. And somehow that felt like enough. I did not leave with answers written down. There was no list to memorize, no doctrine to defend, no argument sharpened enough to win a debate. I did not walk away with certainty tucked safely into my pocket. What I carried instead was quieter and heavier in a way that felt useful. I carried a change in posture. I realized that most of the questions I had spent my life asking were not wrong. They were sincere. They were human, but they were incomplete. They searched outward when they needed to turn inward. They asked for permission when what was required was responsibility. They reached for certainty when what was being asked of me was patience. I had come into the room hoping to understand God. What I learned was how little I had been listening to others, to myself, to the spaces between certainty and doubt where growth actually happens. The interview, I understood now, had never been about God explaining the universe. It had been about revealing how quickly I try to finish things that are meant to stay open. How often I rush to conclusions because uncertainty makes me uneasy. How easily I confuse confidence with wisdom, noise with clarity, belief with depth. What stayed with me most was not any single answer. It was the tone beneath them all, unhurried, unthreatened, unimpressed by certainty. A tone that did not demand agreement, but invited attention. And slowly, I began to see the pattern. Every answer had been pointing away from spectacle and toward responsibility, away from final truths and toward daily choices, away from proving something and toward practicing something. Listening, repair, curiosity, restraint. I understood then that if there was a lesson meant for me, or for anyone listening, it was not to believe more fiercely, but to listen more honestly. Not to know more, but to notice more. Not to become flawless, but to become available. Available to correction without humiliation. Available to growth without shame. Available to others without needing to control them. I realized how often I had treated uncertainty as a failure state, something to escape as quickly as possible. And yet, in that room, uncertainty had not felt like a void. It had felt like space. Space where humility could breathe. Space where questions could mature instead of harden. Space where difference did not automatically become danger. I began to understand that a meaningful life is not built by collecting the right answers and guarding them carefully. It is built by asking better questions and staying present long enough for those questions to change you. By resisting the urge to collapse complexity into slogans. By slowing down when reaction feels easier than reflection. By choosing repair over performance and curiosity over certainty. As I returned to the ordinary world, the speed, the noise, the endless pressure to take sides and speak quickly, I knew that nothing I'd heard would matter unless it shaped how I moved through it, how slowly I reacted when provoked, how carefully I spoke when I was unsure, how gently I treated what I did not yet understand. I understood that the interview did not end in that room. It continued wherever someone paused instead of retaliated, where someone listened instead of concluded, where someone chose to stay present rather than disappear behind certainty or fear. It continued in small, unremarkable moments, the only ones that ever really change anything. And if there was one thing I knew for certain as I stepped forward again, it was this: the conversation is never closed. The listening is never finished. And whatever God is, whatever meaning ultimately is, it seems to meet us not at the end of our certainty, but in the quiet, courageous choice to remain attentive in a world that keeps asking us to rush. This was a Quiet Archives record, where the story ends, sleep begins.